By the autumn of 1942, the city of Sevastopol was no longer a city in the traditional sense. It was a wound carved into the Crimean coast, burning, bleeding, yet somehow still alive. For 250 days, it had resisted one of the most concentrated bombardments in human history. German and Romanian forces had thrown everything at it: artillery so large it cracked the earth, aerial raids that turned daylight into firestorms, and infantry assaults that came wave after wave. Most cities would have fallen in weeks. Sevastopol did not. What history often forgets is what happened after the world stopped watching. When the final evacuation ships left the harbor under cover of darkness in July 1942, they carried officers, wounded soldiers, and key personnel. Tens of thousands were left behind. No orders, no supplies, no escape. Officially, the defense was over. Unofficially, the war in Sevastopol was just beginning. The Germans believed the city was dead. They were wrong. Beneath the shattered streets, below collapsed hospitals and ruined cathedrals, existed a second Sevastopol, a hidden city of stone and darkness. An ancient network of limestone quarries, storage tunnels, drainage shafts, and naval bunkers stretched for kilometers underground. Some dated back centuries, others had been carved hastily during the siege. Into this underworld disappeared those who refused to surrender. Sailors without ships, soldiers without units, nurses who burned their uniforms, engineers who carried maps in their heads instead of paper. Civilians who had watched their families die and chose resistance over survival. They became something new. They became the stone ghosts of Sevastopol. Lieutenant Mikhail Arseniev had been a naval artillery officer. At 31, his hair had already begun to gray from exhaustion long before the siege ended. On the last night above ground, he stood near the ruins of Battery No. 30, watching flames consume the harbor. A messenger found him just before dawn. "There is a way below," the man said. "Not evacuation. Something else." Followed without questions. The entrance was hidden behind a collapsed wine cellar. A narrow crack in the stone led into a shaft descending sharply into darkness. One by one, men and women slipped inside, pulling rubble back into place behind them. When the last light vanished, Sevastopol above ceased to exist. Down below, the air was cold and wet. The smell of limestone mixed with oil, blood, and smoke. Lanterns flickered to life, revealing faces hollowed by hunger, but sharpened by resolve. A man stepped forward, older, bearded, wearing the remnants of a Red Army uniform stripped of insignia. "My name is Sergei Volkov. I was an engineer before the war. I know these tunnels better than any map." He paused, letting his words settle. "We have no command, no supply lines, no reinforcement. If you stay, you will not be soldiers anymore." "What will we be?" someone asked. Sergei's eyes reflected the lantern light like stone. "We will be the city's memory, and its revenge." Above ground, German troops marched triumphantly through the ruins. Flags were raised, reports were filed. The city was declared secured, yet strange things began to happen almost immediately. A sentry vanished during a routine patrol near the docks. No gunshot, no struggle, just an empty helmet found days later, placed carefully on a crate. A supply convoy exploded at night. No aircraft overhead, no artillery fire detected. Only a single charge placed with surgical precision beneath the lead truck. Graffiti began appearing on walls at dawn, painted in crude charcoal. "Sevastopol still breathes." The German command dismissed it as the work of stragglers. Then an officer was found dead inside a locked headquarters building, throat cut, documents missing, windows untouched. Fear does not arrive loudly. It seeps. In the tunnels, life became ritual. Water was collected drop by drop from condensation traps. Food was scavenged during night raids and shared without argument. Ammunition was counted like currency. Silence was law. Mikhail became a leader not by rank, but by calm. When panic struck, his voice stayed steady. When hope faded, he spoke of time. "They have clocks," he told them. We have patience. Small teams began to emerge at night, guided by memory rather than maps. They learned the rhythm of occupation, the changing guards, the careless routes, the moments when discipline softened. They struck only when success was certain. One bullet, one blade, one explosion. Then back into the stone. The Germans began sealing entrances, collapsing known shafts, flooding sections of tunnel systems. It did not matter. For every entrance they destroyed, two more remained. The city was honeycombed with resistance. Weeks passed. Winter approached, and the occupiers slowly realized a terrible truth. They had captured the ruins of Sevastopol, but the soul of the city had gone underground, and it was watching, waiting, learning. The first winter wind swept across Sevastopol in silence. Above ground, snow settled gently over shattered streets and burned-out tanks, as if nature itself was trying to bury the evidence of what had happened. German sentries stomped their boots to stay warm, believing the cold was their only enemy now. They had no idea the city was still alive beneath their feet. Deep underground, the stone ghosts counted time differently. There were no days or nights, only dark and darker. Candles were rationed to minutes, not hours. Conversations were whispered, even when no enemy could hear them. Hunger gnawed constantly, turning strong men hollow and making children older overnight. Yet something else grew in the tunnels alongside desperation. Sergei Volkov spread a hand-drawn map across a slab of limestone, weighted at the corners by spent cartridges. It wasn't accurate in the traditional sense, no scale, no compass, but it was perfect in another way. Every tunnel had a memory. This shaft floods in spring, he said quietly. This passage carries sound, don't speak here. And this wall, he tapped the stone twice. This wall is thinner than it looks. Mikhail studied the map, then the faces around him. Sailors, dock workers, a nurse whose hands no longer trembled, a boy of 16 who could move through darkness like smoke. They weren't an army. They were becoming something far more dangerous. The operation was called Echo Black. Its purpose was simple: confirm whether German headquarters had begun using the old naval communication bunker beneath the northern ridge. If true, it would be the first chance to strike at the occupation's nervous system. 3 men went: Mikhail, the boy, Yura, and a former miner named Anton, whose lungs were half ruined but whose sense of stone was flawless. They moved without light for long stretches, guided by fingertips brushing against damp rock. When Yura finally cracked the lantern shutter, its glow revealed something that froze them in place. Footprints. Fresh German boots. Impossible, Anton whispered. They sealed this tunnel. They sealed what they knew, Mikhail replied. They followed the prints to a ventilation chamber, where voices echoed faintly from above German voices. Relaxed, confident, Anton pressed his ear to the ceiling. Telephone lines, he breathed. Generators. The bunker was active. Echo Black was not an attack. It was a test. That night, the stone ghosts did not kill anyone. They did something far more unsettling. They rearranged reality. Telephone wires were rerouted so conversations echoed back with a half-second delay. Maps were rotated slightly on command tables. Door hinges were loosened so they groaned open on their own. At dawn, German officers began arguing. One swore he had already issued an order the night before. Another insisted the room had been locked. A third claimed footsteps followed him in empty corridors. By evening, panic crept in. And panic makes mistakes. The first true kill came 3 nights later. A German signals officer named Lieutenant Franz Keller was known for his routines. Midnight cigarette. Same corridor. Same pause by the window overlooking the frozen harbor. Yura watched from the shadow of a collapsed stairwell, breath measured, heart steady. Mikhail had given him the knife himself. Once, he said. Then vanish. The blade struck cleanly, silently. Franz Keller never finished his cigarette. His body was found at sunrise, but what broke the garrison wasn't the death. It was what was carved into the frost beneath him. We are still here. Reprisals came quickly. Civilians were dragged from basements. Entire blocks were searched. Random executions echoed through the streets as warnings. Below ground, the stone ghosts listened. Some wanted to strike back immediately. Mikhail stopped them. This is what they want. Noise, rage, visibility. Sergei nodded. Stone survives by not moving. They changed tactics. No more signatures. No more messages. No patterns. Only disappearance. Then came the fire. German engineers began pumping fuel into suspected tunnel entrances, igniting it to burn the resistance out. Smoke poured into the underground passages, thick and choking. Candles died. People screamed in the dark. For one terrible hour, it seemed the stone ghosts would suffocate where they stood. It was Anton who saved them. He led them through a forgotten shaft sloping downward, deeper than any had gone before. Water rose to their knees. Then their waists. Finally, they emerged into a vast cavern, natural, untouched, where cold air flowed like a living thing. They had survived, but now they were trapped deeper than ever. Sergei looked around the cavern, eyes shining. "This isn't a grave," he said slowly. "It's a fortress." That night, as German officers celebrated the cleansing of Sevastopol's underground, a single transformer station exploded on the western edge of the city. The lights went out. Across the ruins, in perfect darkness, the stone ghosts began moving again. Silent, unseen, unstoppable, the tunnels had learned how to kill. Darkness is never complete. Even when the power died across Sevastopol, small islands of light remained: oil lamps in headquarters, generator-fed bulbs in command bunkers, cigarette embers glowing briefly in the night. For the stone ghosts, those lights were no longer comfort. They were targets. The cavern Anton had discovered became the heart of the underground resistance. They called it the cathedral, not for its beauty, but for its silence. Sound died there. Voices felt smaller. Fear felt exposed. Sergei reorganized the survivors into cells of 3 to 5. No one knew more than necessary. If one group vanished, the others would continue. Mikhail was placed in charge of psychological operations. "Bullets are expensive," Sergei said. "Fear is renewable." Mikhail understood immediately. To defeat an occupying army, you don't need to destroy its weapons. You need to make doubt its reality. The plan was called Operation Whisperstone. No explosions, only presence. The first phase began inside the German field hospital. At night, when wounded soldiers slept under morphine and exhaustion, the ventilation system carried something: new sounds. Walking slowly, a distant cough, a voice murmuring in Russian, then stopping abruptly. Nurses blamed stress. Doctors blamed shock. Then a patient woke screaming, convinced someone had whispered his name from inside the wall. The next night, 3 more heard it. In the command bunker, maps began changing again, but this time more subtly. Roads led nowhere. Units were marked twice. Entire battalions appeared to be positioned inside the sea. Officers blamed poor printing, until they realized the changes occurred after the maps had been locked away. A lieutenant demanded new keys for the map room. The room was sealed. The changes continued. One morning, German troops discovered something that made hardened veterans pale. The statues. Across the city, old Tsarist monuments and shattered Soviet memorials had been altered overnight. Stone faces had been turned to face German barracks. Stone hands had been repositioned to point at headquarters. One monument bore a single line etched deeply into its base. "You are standing on us." The soldiers refused to guard the squares after sunset. The breaking point came with Colonel Reinhardt. Reinhardt was not a coward. He had survived Poland, France, and the first year of the Eastern Front. He believed in discipline and order. He believed fear was weakness. He also believed the tunnels were empty. On the night of January 17, 1943, he ordered a full inspection of the northern bunker complex personally. His aide protested. "The men won't go, sir." Reinhardt put on his coat. "Then they will watch." The inspection lasted 30 minutes. Only one man returned. Reinhardt's aide staggered into the open, face gray, eyes unfocused. He did not speak for several minutes. When he finally did, his voice barely carried. The walls answered him. They found Reinhardt alive, pinned upright against a stone support beam. No visible wounds, no blood. His mouth was open in a silent scream. Carved into the stone behind his head were dozens of tally marks, some old, some fresh, crossed by a single sentence. "We have always been here." Reinhardt never spoke again. Panic became policy. Curfews tightened. Patrols doubled. Men refused to enter basements alone. German engineers proposed sealing all underground access. Even if it meant abandoning entire districts, the order was approved. For the stone ghosts, it was both a threat and an opportunity. "They're trying to bury us," Yura said. Mikhail shook his head. "No," he replied. "They're trying to bury themselves." Operation Whisperstone entered its final phase. On the same night, in 6 different locations across Sevastopol, German sentries reported the same impossible event. Walls bleeding water in the shape of words. Footprints appearing in fresh snow, leading straight into solid stone. And voices, calm, patient, unmistakably human, speaking from beneath the ground. "Go home." No shots were fired. No attacks launched. Yet by morning, more than 200 men had requested transfer out of Sevastopol. Command denied all requests. From Berlin came a single response: "A city cannot fight you." In the tunnels, Mikhail read the intercepted message and smiled for the first time in months. "Then," he said softly, "they have already lost. But victory has a cost." And in the depths beneath Sevastopol, something darker was beginning to stir, something that would force the stone ghosts to choose between survival and sacrifice. The order came from above with absolute clarity. If the enemy lived underground, then the war would go underground too. German High Command authorized Operation Steinbruch, the quarry operation. It was not designed to win hearts or territory. It was designed to erase. At dawn, the city trembled. Heavy drilling equipment was brought in, not for construction but for penetration. Shafts were bored straight down into suspected tunnel zones. Explosives were lowered and detonated deep beneath the streets, collapsing passages without warning. Above ground, the officers called it engineering. Below ground, it felt like the end of the world. The cathedral shook violently. Stone dust filled the air. A section of the ceiling collapsed, killing 2 instantly and trapping 3 more in darkness that screamed. Mikhail pulled Yura just as a support beam cracked. "They are coming," Yura said. "Not searching. Hunting." Sergei said nothing. He was already studying the vibrations through the rock, eyes closed, hand pressed flat against the wall. "They are afraid," he finally said. "That makes them reckless." For the first time since the fall of Sevastopol, German soldiers entered the tunnels in force. Flamethrower units moved first. Behind them came engineers with demolition packs. Infantry followed last, faces tight, weapons shaking slightly despite orders. The tunnels answered immediately. A flamethrower operator vanished when the floor beneath him collapsed into a hidden shaft. 2 engineers triggered a rock slide by stepping on what looked like solid ground. No shots were fired. The darkness did the killing, but darkness does not choose sides forever. By the 3rd day, the Germans adapted. They brought dogs. Barking echoed through the tunnels like madness. Animals trained to follow scent through stone, smoke, and fear. For the stone ghosts, this was new. "We cannot hide from this," Anton said quietly. "Not forever." Mikhail knew he was right, so he changed the rules. The counterattack was brutal and close. In a narrow passage known only as the Needle, the stone ghosts allowed a patrol to advance deep inside, too deep to retreat quickly, too narrow to maneuver. When the first German soldier rounded the bend, he saw nothing. Then the lights went out. The knives came next. No gunfire, no screams, just short, violent sounds swallowed by stone. When the last body fell, Yura leaned against the wall, shaking. "I saw their faces," he whispered. "They were terrified." Mikhail nodded. "So were we. Once." The Germans retaliated with fire. Fuel was pumped again, this time in greater volume. Entire tunnel branches became furnaces. Oxygen vanished. People ran blind, choking, burning, clawing at stone that would not move. Sergei stayed behind to hold a collapse gate manually, buying time for others to escape. Mikhail tried to stop him. "You won't make it." Sergei smiled faintly. "I was born in these tunnels. Let me die in them." The stone sealed. Sergei Volkov was never seen again. The loss broke something, not morale, not discipline, restraint. From that moment, the stone ghosts stopped trying to scare the enemy. They began to destroy him. Power stations vanished. Ammunition dumps detonated from below. Officers disappeared inside buildings thought to be secure. German command units started sleeping above ground, even during bombardment. Anything was better than the tunnels. But numbers do not care about courage. By early spring, the stone ghosts were fewer than 50. Wounded, exhausted, running out of food, Anton was dead, killed by collapse. 3 children were missing after a firestorm. Only Mikhail and Yura remained from the original Echo Black team. In the silence of the deep tunnels, Yura finally asked the question no one else dared. "What if this is how it ends?" Mikhail did not answer immediately. Then he said, "Cities do not die when they are conquered. They die when they are forgotten." He placed a charge into the stone. "We will not be forgotten." Above ground, German command prepared its final report. Sevastopol underground resistance was listed as neutralized. The tunnels were declared sealed, the threat eliminated. They were wrong. Because beneath their feet, in the deepest stone where maps ended, the survivors were preparing something far larger than survival. Something that would outlive all of them. Deep underground, time no longer moved forward. It circled. The survivors counted fewer than 30 now. Shadows with ribs showing, eyes too sharp for their faces. Every movement hurt, every breath tasted of stone and ash. Yet in the deepest chamber, beyond the collapsed gates and burned passages, something impossible still existed. The archive. It had once been a naval storage vault, carved directly into bedrock. Maps, engineering plans, reserve fuel lines, emergency demolition schematics. The Germans had never found it because it wasn't on any official record. Sergei had known, and he had kept it secret. Anton's old notes were spread across the floor. Yura read them aloud, voice steady despite the weight of what they meant. "If these charges are placed correctly, the collapse won't be local. It will travel like a wave." Mikhail understood immediately. The city above them was built on limestone. Weak, layered, hollowed by centuries of quarries and tunnels. "If they triggered the chain reaction, they won't just lose the tunnels," Yura said. "They'll lose the ground itself." Silence followed. This was no longer resistance. This was erasure. The plan had no name. Names made things easier to remember. This needed to be remembered without words. They would collapse the central underground network. Permanently, every known access point, every occupied bunker above it. The stone ghosts would not escape. No one would. The city would stand, but its occupiers would sink. Arguments broke out. One man begged to wait. Maybe the Red Army would return. Maybe liberation would come. A woman laughed bitterly. "They already left us once." Another whispered a prayer. Yura said nothing. He watched Mikhail. "Is this an order?" he asked quietly, "or a choice?" Mikhail looked at the stone ceiling, at the cracks filled with centuries of dust. Then he answered, "It's a memory." They began preparations. Charges were placed by hand. Fuses measured with care. Every survivor was assigned a section, not to survive, but to finish. Yura was given the final ignition. "You're the fastest," Mikhail told him. "And the bravest." Yura shook his head. "I'm just the youngest." Above ground, German command gathered for a ceremony. Flags were raised. Reports finalized. Sevastopol was officially declared secure. A model occupation. Wine was opened. Toasts were made. At the exact moment the glasses touched, far below, Yura struck the ignition. The first collapse sounded like thunder trapped underground. Then another. Then a roar so deep it didn't travel upward. It traveled outward. Streets cracked. Buildings leaned, bunkers folded like paper. German officers felt the ground breathe beneath them, then scream. In the tunnels, stone moved like water. Walls folded inward, ceilings came down in waves, light vanished completely. Mikhail stood in the center of the archive as the world ended around him. He thought of Sevastopol as it had been, the harbor, the laughter, the stubborn pride. "This is for remembering us," he whispered. The stone answered. Above ground, the city did not explode, it sank. Entire blocks collapsed into themselves. Heavy equipment vanished. Command bunkers caved in. Hundreds were buried alive in places they had believed safe. By morning, Sevastopol was unrecognizable again. But this time, the destruction had intent. German reports would later call it a geological failure. An unfortunate accident, unpredictable terrain. None of them mentioned resistance. None of them mentioned ghosts. Deep beneath the ruins, silence returned, permanent, total. The stone ghosts were gone. But Sevastopol would never again feel empty. The war moved on. Sevastopol disappeared from headlines, replaced by new fronts, new disasters, new victories. Maps were redrawn. Generals were promoted or executed. Entire armies vanished into history. But Sevastopol was never rebuilt the way it had been before. Engineers tried. They measured. They argued over blueprints and geological reports. Every attempt to stabilize the ground failed. Foundations cracked without reason. Basements flooded where no water should exist. Instruments gave contradictory readings. Officially, the cause was unstable limestone. Unofficially, workers refused to dig too deep. The ground felt wrong. Years later, after the war had ended and flags had changed, Soviet investigators returned to the city. They searched for records of the underground resistance. They found almost nothing. No names, no unit numbers, no graves. Only scattered reports from German archives. Mentions of fear, of tunnels that could not be secured, of a city that behaved like an enemy. One file was marked simply, unexplainable. Children grew up hearing stories they were not supposed to repeat. About walls that whispered at night. About footsteps beneath empty streets. About a boy who ran faster than fire. Parents told them to forget. Stone does not forget. In the 1960s, during a subway survey that was never completed, a drilling team broke through into an unknown cavern. They found no bodies, no weapons, only a smooth stone wall. Carved into it, deep and deliberate, were words in Russian. "We are still here." The project was sealed, the report classified, the entrance filled with concrete. Even today, soldiers stationed near the old districts report strange things. Radios cutting out underground, compass needles drifting, dogs refusing to enter certain basements. No one investigates for long. There are easier places to serve. Historians still argue. Some claim the underground resistance never existed, that the collapses were accidents. That fear created myths where none were needed. Others disagree. They point out one fact no one can explain. Despite total occupation, despite overwhelming force, Sevastopol never truly served its occupiers. Production lagged. Security costs doubled. Morale collapsed. The city resisted without an army, without a flag, without survivors. There is a saying among miners and engineers who work stone along the Black Sea coast. If the ground is quiet, listen carefully. It may not be empty. It may be waiting. Because cities are not made of buildings, they are made of memory. And in Sevastopol, the stone remembers everything.